Hello and welcome back to another video, Harry Potter and the Book of Illusions. Please consider giving us a like and let's get started. Harry Potter pressed his forehead against the window of the Hogwarts Express, watching rolling hills and peaceful farmlands blur by. Sunlight filtered through shifting clouds, dappling the train cabin with patches of gold. It had been over a year since he, Hermione Granger, and Ron Weasley had been students at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in any conventional sense. The last time they had truly dwelled within its walls, the war against Voldemort had been raging, and the idea of normal classes felt distant. This time, however, Headmistress McGonagall had made a surprising announcement. Select students from the year impacted most by the war would be given a chance to complete specialized courses, covering both standard curriculum and advanced magical theory. It was an opportunity for them to learn in a more peaceful environment, though Harry deep down suspected truly peaceful might be too optimistic a word. Troubles had a habit of finding him within those ancient corridors. Across from Harry, Hermione busily reorganized her notes. Ron lounged on the seat beside her, stifling a yawn. A near-empty box of chocolate frogs sat on his lap. After their many months on the run, the simple routine of traveling to school by train again felt surreal. "Can you believe it?" Hermione said, tapping her quill against the parchment scribbled with upcoming schedules. "We're actually going back. I wonder how many changes the professors have made." Ron made a face. "They better not have changed the Quidditch pitch," he muttered. "I've been dreaming of playing on that field again." Hermione rolled her eyes affectionately. "Some things never change." Harry tried to smile, but there was a flutter of anxiety in his chest. Hogwarts represented safety, yes, but it also harbored countless secrets and memories, some comforting, others weighed down by loss. He gently fingered the wand in his pocket, remembering the last time he'd walked those stone halls. Dobby, Remus, Fred, and so many others would never again watch the sorting ceremony or share a meal at the Gryffindor table. Eventually, the train screeched to a halt at Hogsmeade Station. Stepping out onto the platform, they joined a smaller crowd than usual, largely composed of returning seventh years and a handful of ministry-affiliated researchers who seemed intent on studying Hogwarts wards. Hermione leaned in and whispered, "Strange, isn't it, seeing so many unfamiliar faces?" Ron nodded. "Reckon they're part of McGonagall's new plan. Maybe they're the ones improving security." Harry wasn't so sure. A stern-faced witch with silver-rimmed spectacles locked eyes with him briefly, then disappeared into a swirl of dark blue robes. He felt a prickle of unease, but before he could dwell on it, Rubeus Hagrid's booming voice cut through the crowd. "All right, you lot. Over air, if you please. Got the carriages waiting." They followed Hagrid's call, boarding the same thestral-drawn carriages that once felt so ominous to Harry. Now, the black skeletal creatures seemed almost comforting, as though acknowledging the burdens he carried. Once inside, the trio was enveloped by the hush of forest air. The path curved beneath the rustling boughs of trees and opened to reveal Hogwarts Castle. Rising in majestic silhouette, tall turrets and sweeping arches framed the glowing windows, which flickered a gentle welcome. Inside the castle, warm torchlight illuminated the entrance hall. Harry noticed new portraits along the walls, paintings of witches and wizards who had fought during the Battle of Hogwarts. He paused at one painting of Remus Lupin, which gave him a sad, knowing smile. Swallowing the lump in his throat, Harry continued onward. When they entered the Great Hall, Headmistress McGonagall stood by the staff table, greeting each returning student. Her gaze found Harry, Hermione, and Ron almost instantly. Though her expression remained formal, he sensed the fondness behind it. "Welcome back," she said softly, as though each word carried the weight of a year's worth of hope. "This term may be short, but it will be significant." Ron nudged Harry, and they exchanged glances that brimmed with anticipation. It was a new beginning, or so they told themselves, but deep within the castle's ancient walls, the first threads of a fresh mystery had already begun to weave. Whispers of hidden passages and long-lost tomes drifted through hushed corners, waiting to be discovered, and as the evening's feast commenced, none of them realized how dangerously those secrets would soon entangle them, plunging Hogwarts into yet another battle between the magic of knowledge and the shadowy art of deception. A crisp September morning light filtered through the tall windows of the entrance hall, revealing floating specks of dust dancing in the air. Harry, Hermione, and Ron had just finished a modest breakfast in the Great Hall, far quieter than the usual September feast, as most of the student body was absent this term. Even so, Headmistress McGonagall's plan for advanced specialized lessons had drawn a diverse range of guest scholars and ministry researchers, lending the corridors an undercurrent of muted excitement. After consulting their new schedules, the trio found themselves with a free hour before their first lesson. Hermione, predictably, proposed a visit to the library, eager to see how it had changed under Madam Pince's guidance. Ron grumbled something about wanting to check the Quidditch pitch, but he followed Harry and Hermione nonetheless. As they made their way across the flagstone floors, they noticed several groups of robed figures in hushed conversation. The presence of outsiders still felt jarring. A subtle tension bristled in the air. It wasn't outright panic, more like the feeling of a coiled spring, ready to snap. Harry caught sight of a tall wizard with salt and pepper hair giving them a quick, assessing glance before disappearing into a stairwell. In the next corridor, the same stern-faced witch from Hogsmeade Station, the one with silver-rimmed spectacles, paused in conversation with another researcher, her gaze sliding over to the three friends. Harry tried to appear nonchalant, but he couldn't shake the sense that people were watching them more closely than usual. Once at the library's entrance, Hermione breathed an awed sigh. The space was still familiar, row upon row of towering shelves and dust motes swirling in colored sunlight. But there were new additions as well. One entire side of the library had been cordoned off with rope, behind which stood rows of glass cabinets, displaying curious magical artifacts, an orb that flickered like trapped fire, a scepter carved from pale wood, and several tattered scrolls sealed with ancient runes. Madam Pince, as ever, guarded the library with hawk-like vigilance. When she spotted the trio, her severe expression softened, if only slightly. "Ah, Miss Granger, Mr. Potter, Mr. Weasley, back so soon?" "We wanted to see the new exhibits," Hermione said, barely containing her excitement. Madam Pince nodded curtly. "They're on loan from the Ministry. Some are centuries old, rarities. Even for Hogwarts." Harry studied the objects with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. He had learned the hard way that unusual magical items were rarely innocuous. Ron, meanwhile, tapped on the glass of one cabinet, his nose nearly pressed against it. "Hey, look, this scroll's moving on its own." Indeed, the parchment seemed to shift, words rearranging themselves like restless insects. Before Hermione could scold Ron for smudging the display, the library doors thudded open behind them. A short, wiry man, wearing official ministry robes, hurried in, muttering under his breath as he approached Madam Pince. Harry could just make out a frantic snippet of conversation. Strange readings near the lower levels, illusions that might not be illusions at all. Something in the man's tone made Harry's stomach clench. Lower levels could only mean the dungeons or the catacombs beneath Hogwarts' foundations, places that had seen more than their share of dark happenings over the centuries. Catching Harry's eye, Hermione raised a curious brow. Ron, too, had tuned in, having heard enough cryptic chatter at Hogwarts to know trouble might be brewing. The man soon left, and Madam Pince returned to tidying the shelves, but the air felt heavier. Hermione glanced at Harry. "Illusions that aren't illusions," she whispered. "That sounds ominous. Should we tell McGonagall?" Harry considered it, recalling how the war had forced him to grow up fast. Part of him longed for the days when a Quidditch match was the biggest worry. "Let's keep our eyes open," he decided. "We'll ask questions first. No need to raise alarms without more information." With that, they slipped out of the library and back into the corridor. Echoes of footsteps and the soft flicker of torchlight accompanied them as they walked. None of them spoke for a while. It felt as though the castle itself was holding its breath, awaiting whatever new mystery stirred within its ancient stone walls. And if the quiet rumors were true, if illusions were seeping into reality, the trio knew they couldn't ignore the tension for long. Sooner or later, they would have to follow the whispers winding through Hogwarts' winding corridors, ready or not. Despite their best efforts, Harry, Hermione, and Ron found it nearly impossible to focus on their advanced transfiguration lesson that afternoon. Professor Flitwick, filling in for McGonagall while she dealt with a matter in her office, was animatedly explaining high-level vanishing spells, fascinating magic under normal circumstances. Yet the trio's thoughts kept drifting back to that unsettling snippet overheard in the library. Illusions that might not be illusions at all. When the class concluded, Flitwick dismissed them with a cheerful wave. Ron, in an attempt to lighten the mood, joked that maybe they could vanish each other's worries with a quick flick of the wand. Hermione's thin smile betrayed her tension. Harry, silent, led the way into the corridor, where torchlight sent flickering shadows dancing across the stone walls. The moment they reached the quieter part of the castle, Hermione suggested they investigate further. If illusions are showing up in the dungeons, she reasoned, we need to find out why. I'd like to think nothing sinister is going on, but let's be honest, this is Hogwarts. They headed down a side staircase that spiraled into the lower levels. A damp chill clung to the air, and the stones underfoot were cold enough that Harry felt it through the soles of his shoes. The deeper they went, the more aware they became of the castle's ancient construction. Thick walls that seemed to hold not only moisture, but secrets. At the foot of the stairs, Peeves the poltergeist zipped past with a cackle, scattering a handful of chalk dust that made them cough. Hovering upside down, he grinned wickedly. Nasty things in the dark. Oh yes indeed, he squealed, voice echoing in the corridor. Peevesy hears them creeping in the walls. Illusions, illusions, illusions. He burst into a fit of giggles and zoomed off, leaving the trio exchanging wary glances. See, Ron muttered. If Peeves is concerned, that's never a good sign. They continued on until they reached a stretch of corridor that Harry remembered from the days of potions with Professor Snape. Here, the walls were lined with old portraits, most of them slumbering or glaring from behind dusty frames. The corridor's torch brackets had been replaced by what looked like new, enchanted sconces that glowed with a softer, bluish light. Hermione paused to examine one. Ministry-grade lighting spells, she observed quietly. They must have been set up after we left. Rounding the next corner, they heard a faint scraping sound echo from somewhere ahead. It was difficult to place. The acoustics in the dungeons tended to distort even the smallest noise. Harry raised his wand, the tip casting a golden halo around them. Lumos, he whispered, and Hermione and Ron followed suit. Step by step, they moved closer to where the corridor split into two directions. Suddenly, an ethereal shimmer flashed along the wall like a heat mirage. Ron inhaled sharply. The shimmer coalesced into a vague outline of a figure, a robed silhouette that flickered in and out of sight. It didn't resemble any typical Hogwarts ghost. Its shape was distorted, as though made of swirling, half-real smoke. Hello, Hermione called softly. She inched forward, but the figure vanished the moment her voice echoed down the hall. Harry broke the silence, his voice steady even as his heart pounded. That's no ordinary apparition. It's just like what they said, illusions that might be more than illusions. They followed the corridor to the left, where they discovered a heavy wooden door slightly ajar. Ron gently pushed it open, revealing an old storage room piled high with dusty crates. Barrels labeled with faded potions, ingredients lined the walls. The space was silent and abandoned, with only the soft glow of their wand light to illuminate centuries of cobwebs. Hermione scrutinized the nearest crate. Nothing here but outdated supply lists. This room looks untouched for ages. Before they could examine further, a sudden gust slammed the door behind them, plunging the cramped space into darkness. Ron yelped in surprise, and Harry raised his wand higher, fighting back a surge of anxiety. An unsettling presence prickled at the edge of Harry's senses, like static electricity just before lightning strikes. Then, as abruptly as it had come, the gust died. All fell still, leaving the three friends in a tense silence. Outside, they heard distant footfalls echo in the corridor, someone or something moving swiftly away. Hermione swallowed hard. There's definitely something going on down here, she said. I think we've seen enough to realize it's not just rumors. Harry nodded. We'll need to keep watch, and maybe we should talk to McGonagall. She might know more than she's letting on. None of them spoke as they emerged back into the dungeon corridor. Whatever lurked in these depths, whatever illusions or half-real phantoms roamed, was only growing bolder. And if history had taught them anything, it was that in Hogwarts' darkest corners, silent whispers often grew into dangerous roars. Harry, Hermione, and Ron had scarcely escaped the eerie storage room when a swirl of questions began piling up in their minds. Who or what had been lurking in the dungeons? Was it tied to the mysterious illusions that rumor claimed were no mere phantoms? None of them voiced their worries as they hurried back upstairs, each preoccupied with private misgivings about what they had witnessed. By the time they reached the entrance hall, The last notes of the evening bell were echoing through the corridors. Although curfew was still an hour away, the school felt oddly vacant. Soft torchlight glowed on the polished flagstones, revealing only the occasional ministry researcher striding purposefully across the hall. Once or twice, a robed figure cast them a curious glance, but nobody approached. "We should tell McGonagall what we saw," Hermione said, breaking the heavy silence that lingered since their journey from the dungeons. Ron nodded emphatically. "I've had enough dark, shady business in Hogwarts corridors to last a lifetime. No sense keeping this to ourselves." Harry was torn between a desire for caution and his trust in the headmistress. Caution had become second nature after all their previous close calls, but McGonagall had been forthright so far. And if someone else was tampering with Hogwarts, she needed to know. "All right," he said at last. "Let's find her." The trio made their way up the moving staircases, navigating shifting steps and vanishing landings until they arrived at the stone gargoyle that guarded McGonagall's office. Without a password, the gargoyle should have remained unmoving, yet it leapt aside the moment they approached, a silent summons, as if the castle itself acknowledged their urgency. They ascended the spiral staircase and knocked on the heavy oak door. A moment later, they heard Headmistress McGonagall's calm voice bid them enter. Inside, her office appeared both familiar and new. Albus Dumbledore's old instruments were gone, replaced by reference books on advanced spell theory and educational reform. Fawkes's golden perch stood empty near the window, but subtle changes didn't diminish the comforting warmth of the space, lit by a gently crackling fireplace. McGonagall looked up from a roll of parchment, her eyes, alert behind square spectacles, flicked between the three friends. "I thought you might turn up," she said, setting the parchment aside. "Your presence was anticipated." Hermione exchanged a look with Ron. "Anticipated, Professor?" McGonagall's expression softened a fraction. "Let's just say I could sense the castle had more than the usual night's activity below its floors." She gestured for them to sit. "What have you discovered?" Taking a seat, Harry spoke first, recounting everything. Peeves's cryptic remarks, the swirling silhouette in the corridor, the door that had slammed shut in the storage room, and the lingering presence that felt almost alive. With each sentence, McGonagall's features grew more grave. When Harry finished, she leaned back in her chair. "I was afraid of this. Over the summer, we suspected the dungeons had become unsettled. Certain wards that guard against malevolent forces have been reacting oddly. I'd hoped it was merely residual magic from the war. Clearly it's something more." Ron frowned. "Why not seal off that part of the castle?" McGonagall pressed her lips together. "Because there's research underway in the lower levels, an important ministry study of ancient magical architecture and relics. Most is benign enough, but something has evidently seeped in. A power we don't fully understand yet." Hermione leaned forward, hands clasped. "We heard someone mention illusions that might not be illusions at all. That's the exact wording." A flicker of acknowledgement passed over McGonagall's face. "Yes, certain artifacts in Hogwarts' deeper vaults are rumored to magnify illusions into tangible forms. If one were to weaponize such a relic, or misuse a specific enchantment, that might explain the phenomenon." Ron's eyes widened. "You mean illusions that can actually hurt people?" "Potentially, yes," McGonagall said, sounding weary. "While I've been hesitant to alarm everyone, this cannot be ignored. Tomorrow morning, we'll begin a systematic search. I've secured help from several skilled witches and wizards in the ministry who specialize in containment spells." Harry and Hermione exchanged looks. They'd encountered cursed objects and illusions made real before. Rarely a pleasant experience. "We want to help," Harry said firmly. McGonagall studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Your experience is invaluable. I won't deny that. But be cautious. If these illusions truly are crossing into the realm of tangible magic, then you must treat them as seriously as any curse or creature you've ever faced." A taut silence settled over the office. Outside the windows, night had fully descended, cloaking the Hogwarts grounds in inky darkness. The castle felt more like a sentinel than a school, standing watch against an unseen threat. Yet beneath that watchful stillness, something stirred. A gathering storm of illusions, secrets, and hidden forces. Finally, McGonagall stood. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day and likely a dangerous one. I'll meet you at dawn in the Great Hall." Nodding, the trio rose. Harry cast one last glance around the office, noticing the quiet presence of old headmasters' portraits lining the walls. Those painted figures seemed to gaze back at him, a silent reminder that Hogwarts was as much a repository of mysteries as it was a place of learning. And as they descended the spiral staircase, each of them felt a ripple of foreboding. Whatever lay below was no simple ghost story. The illusions crouched in the depths had begun to bleed into reality, and soon the trio would have to face the very heart of that threatening magic. Morning light had only just begun to creep through the high windows of the Great Hall when Harry, Hermione, and Ron entered. The castle was eerily silent in these early hours. The hush lent an almost reverential atmosphere to the place. A handful of ministry researchers stood in clusters near the staff table, speaking in low, hurried voices. Their robes bore the ministry's official seal, and several carried worn satchels bursting with parchment and clinking vials. Headmistress McGonagall was already there, in hushed conversation with a tall, bespectacled wizard named Stanton Kersey, who, from the stiff way he carried himself, was evidently in charge of the specialized search team. McGonagall spotted the trio and waved them closer. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady. "We'll begin in the Great Hall itself. It seems unusual, but certain illusions have been reported appearing even here in the heart of the school." Kersey nodded curtly. "Professor, if we don't find evidence in the hall, we'll proceed below it." He paused to give Harry, Hermione, and Ron a measured glance. "My team deals with high-level magical anomalies. That includes illusions that could manifest physical effects." Ron perked up. "So, illusions that can hit us back?" Kersey's lips thinned. "In layman's terms, yes." Without further warning, 2 more ministry officials stepped forward and began casting detection spells. Bands of pale light arced over the walls, flickering across the ceiling and the long tables. A hum, barely audible, grew in intensity as the spells probed for irregular magical signatures. Harry found himself recalling the first time he stepped into the Great Hall, its enchanted ceiling a reflection of the starry sky outside. Today, that same ceiling showed a dawn so clear and bright it almost seemed at odds with their grim mission. Hermione exhaled softly, her hands curled around her wand. "I hope we don't find anything dangerous in here," she murmured. "This place deserves more peaceful days." Moments later, the detection spells fizzled. One of the officials shook his head. "I'm picking up mild traces of illusions, but nothing that shouldn't be here naturally. After all, the ceiling and the house banners have their own enchantments. Everything else seems normal." Kersey, looking unconvinced, furrowed his brow. "Let's proceed to the Undercrofts, then." He gestured toward a nondescript door at the far edge of the hall, typically used for behind-the-scenes access to the kitchens and storage areas. "We've mapped out a route through some disused chambers below, where the wards are weakest." The group descended a narrow staircase, passing by the kitchen corridor with its inviting smells of bread and tea. But the cozy warmth soon gave way to cold stone as they headed deeper into Hogwarts' foundations. Winding passages branched off at odd angles, lit only by their wand light. McGonagall remained at the front, her posture rigid, as though anticipating an attack at every turn. Hermione paused where an archway opened onto a dark chamber. "I think we're under the Great Hall now," she said, consulting her own wand, which she'd enchanted to act like a crude compass. Its tip glowed when pointing north, flickering with each step. One by one, they passed through the arch. Instantly, a chill rippled across Harry's skin, raising the hairs on the back of his neck. The air felt denser here, almost electric, and even McGonagall faltered for a moment. "Everyone stay close," she whispered, her voice echoing disconcertingly. What lay beyond was a wide, vault-like space with thick pillars supporting the Great Hall above. The floor was littered with debris, broken chairs, stacks of ancient crates, and old banners from tournaments past. Shadows clung to the columns, shifting in the wand light. Then somewhere in the darkness, a soft whisper, "Harry Potter." Harry froze, heart pounding. This time, the voice wasn't Peeves or some whimsical ghost. It was low and resonant, as though the very stones of Hogwarts were speaking. Ron tensed, wand drawn, while Hermione pressed closer to him. The ministry officials swept their detection spells in frantic arcs, but it was McGonagall who took a slow step forward. "Identify yourself," she commanded, her tone urgent yet composed. Instead of a reply, a swirl of faint light drifted between 2 columns, coalescing into the outline of a robed figure, similar to the illusion Harry had seen in the dungeons, but more defined this time. Its edges crackled with a pale glow, and though its face was a blur, it seemed to stare straight at Harry. Then, In a rapid burst of movement, it tore across the chamber and vanished behind a stack of crates, leaving a trail of eerie sparks in its wake. Kersey's voice rang out. "Surround that area, containment spells, quickly." But even as the officials hurried to intercept, the figure dissolved into nothingness. A hollow gust of wind swept through, rustling the remnants of old banners. Disquieted silence fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of everyone present. McGonagall's eyes were grim. "It seems we've just confirmed our suspicions," she said quietly. Hermione exhaled a shaky breath. "So the illusions really are manifesting in the real world?" Harry nodded, his wand still raised. In the recesses of his mind, he wondered if the figure's whisper, utterly personal, suggested a deeper connection to him. There was no doubt now. Something alive and purposeful lurked beneath Hogwarts, an illusion bridging the gap between fantasy and reality. And if it specifically sought Harry, then the danger was only beginning. The robed figure's echoing whisper still seemed to linger in the cold air beneath Hogwarts as Harry stood rooted to the spot, wand in hand. Around him, McGonagall's search team exchanged alarmed glances. They had all come face to face with illusions before, moving paintings, enchanted suits of armor, and the Hogwarts ceiling itself, but nothing quite like this sentient spectre that called out to Harry. Stanton Kersey barked orders, his tone tense. "Form a perimeter around these pillars. If this thing manifests again, we'll trap it." His fellow officials scurried into position, wands aimed toward the darkness. Harry, Hermione, and Ron shared a look. They knew illusions could be frightening, but illusions that seemed to know Harry by name suggested a deeper link, perhaps something bound to Hogwarts' long history with him. Hermione bit her lip. "Harry, do you think it could be some remnant from the war? A leftover fragment of dark magic key to you?" Harry shook his head. "I honestly don't know. It felt different. Not like a curse exactly, more like it was searching for me." McGonagall stepped forward, her wand raised. "Let's search further. If the illusions are growing stronger here, there could be a focal point nearby." She glanced at Hermione, who nodded and tapped her wand against her palm. Hermione had prepared a specialized revealing spell she learned from the advanced tomes in the restricted section, taught in bits and pieces by McGonagall and Professor Flitwick. With a whispered incantation, a faint pulse of bluish-white light spread from her wand, rippling outward in concentric circles. Ron shielded his eyes from the brightness as it rebounded off the far walls and pillars. A moment later, the light formed a hazy outline around an archway at the chamber's northern side. It was so faint that Harry and Ron might have missed it if not for Hermione's spell. "There," Hermione breathed. "There's a hidden passage behind that stack of crates." Kersey, hearing her, motioned for his team to investigate. They carefully levitated the crates aside, revealing a narrow portal carved into the stone. Its surface shimmered like water caught in moonlight, as though an invisible curtain hung across the entrance. McGonagall hesitated before stepping closer. She placed a hand against the shimmering doorway, and her eyes flickered with realization. "A perimeter ward, but very old," she murmured. "Likely from the Founders' era. It's designed to conceal whatever lies beyond from prying eyes." Hermione's voice shook with restrained excitement. "We should go in. This could be the source of the illusions." Kersey looked skeptical. "We have containment spells, but this is ancient magic. If we cross that threshold, we can't predict what we'll find." Harry met McGonagall's gaze, then nodded, feeling a familiar mixture of dread and determination. "We faced worse unknowns. If this is truly Hogwarts magic, older than anything we've seen, then it might explain these manifestations." With a deft twirl of her wand, McGonagall began unraveling the concealment ward. The shimmering curtain quivered and parted, revealing a short corridor lit by an otherworldly silver glow. Without another word, Harry led the way, Hermione and Ron flanking him, and the Ministry officials following under McGonagall's watchful eye. Their footsteps echoed on the stone floor as they ventured deeper. The silver light seemed to bleed from the walls themselves, casting elongated shadows in irregular patterns. Near the corridor's end, they discovered an ornate door, etched with swirling runes that danced across its surface like living threads of moonlight. Hermione drew a sharp breath. "I've never seen runes react this vividly before." Ron's wand hand trembled slightly. "It's almost like they're watching us." As the group approached, the runes glowed brighter, and that same disembodied voice from earlier drifted through the air. "Harry Potter, you hold the key." A quick chill rippled through Harry. He raised his free hand to the door, fingers barely brushing the intricate carvings. At once, a faint warmth pulsed against his palm. The runes swirled faster, and a soft humming filled the corridor. Kersey and the officials tensed, spells at the ready for whatever might burst through. Even McGonagall seemed taken aback by the door's reaction to Harry's touch. But before anyone could speak or act, a vision shimmered in the air. Another illusion. This time, it wasn't just a shadowy figure. It was an entire scene, half transparent, yet brimming with detail. Through the haze, they glimpsed a grand chamber lined with shelves of archaic tomes, the centerpiece being a massive, ancient book bound in black leather. The flickering image was as quick as a flash of lightning, then vanished as if someone had snuffed out a candle. Hermione let out a whispered gasp. "Did you see that? A book?" Harry nodded, his heart pounding. The Book of Illusions. Even as the words left his mouth, the door shuddered ominously, as though awakened by the utterance of that forbidden title. And in the charged silence that followed, Harry knew they'd stumbled onto something profoundly old, powerful, and intimately tied to the illusions now haunting Hogwarts' depths.